greet from for the SAA Performing Arts Section Steering Committee. Today we're joined by Abigail Williams, who is the project archivist for the book, paper, and photography element of the collection of the David Bowie Archive. David Bowie's personal archive was acquired by the V&A in February of 2024 and opened to the public in September of 2025. A collection of some 90,000 items spanning Bowie's lifetime. It was it was assessed and cataloged by a cross-disciplinary project team of catalogers, conservators, and photographers, and is now housed in the David Bowie Center at the V&A East Storehouse. Ms. Williams will be exploring the archive and how it was assembled while in Bowie's custody and trace his input in the archive's curation. I'm going to also cover a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. The Performing Arts Committee will be hosting a meet and greet each month for the next few months, and we hope that you'll keep an eye out for those announcements, and we also hope that you'll join us in the future. Additionally, we have a lot of people attending this presentation today, and we will be keeping all members on mute for the duration of the Zoom. Please put your questions for the Q&A in the chat. This will maximize our time, and Megan and I will try our best to cover as much as we can. And finally, Abigail is joining us from across the pond, so please, to respect her time, and the time difference, we're going to try to end on the hour today. So, Abigail, you can get started as soon as you're able.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me. I'm very honoured that you've all joined. Such is the lure, as someone said, of Starman. Let me just share my screen. So I'm going to, I can't see any of you now, but I'm going to presume that you can all see my screen, and I'm going to press ahead with this talk. So yeah, I'm the project archivist for the David Bowie Archive. I'm based at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. That's the museum that holds the David Bowie Archive and is my employer. So I've got about 30 minutes to talk to you today, and then the rest of the time will be questions. So I'm going to start just giving you an overview of the project, and also a bit of an intro to the Bowie Archive. Before going on to talk about how the archive was collected and how much input Bowie had. Just to note that I never met Bowie, haven't ever been able to ask him what he did and why he collected certain things. This is pretty much all the stuff that myself and my team have learned through the process of cataloguing his records, through like clues that he's left behind, some of which I'll present to you today. So firstly, what is the David Bowie Archive? So someone in the chat was quite surprised, but it is indeed about 90,000 items. It's a combination of book and paper material, and that's the stuff I'm responsible for, and like, for want of a better definition, three-dimensional objects. So costumes, musical instruments, furniture. We've got Bowie's desk, for example, that was in his office. So I'd say probably 90 to 95%, probably 90% of it is book and paper. It's just the nature of the archive, and the rest is three-dimensional items. It's also worth noting that this was all collected by and for Bowie himself. It's not a fan archive, although sometimes, and I'll get into this a bit later, sometimes it looks like it is. It's not a third-party collector archive. It's all Bowie collecting his own stuff. It was looked after by a team hired by Bowie himself from the 1990s onwards. And I'm sorry to say to you all that we have deprived you all of Bowie's archive, because it did originally live in the US, and was shipped over to the UK when it was acquired by the V&A. So sorry about that. And yes, it was acquired by the V&A in, well, the negotiation happened quite a long time before 2024, but the first items arrived on these shores in 2024, and so that's when I think of it as the project starting. So speaking of the Bowie Archive project, it's been a 2-year project. So it started, the whole Bowie project team was hired in May 2024, and it runs until May 2026. So we're really kind of approaching the end of the project. Now we're in the process of just like tying things up and providing a bit more public access. So it's probably one of the largest single archival collections ever acquired by the V&A. And so an unusually large team was hired to process it, essentially. I think this isn't really standard for the V&A in terms of cataloguing projects. So there was an archive team hired of 3 people. That's myself as the project archivist, and then 2 archive assistants. An object cataloguing team, so that's kind of our equivalents, but just on the object care side rather than the paper material care side. 2 professional photographers who took photos of every single 3-dimensional object and some of the paper archive as well, although obviously not all 90,000 items. And a conservation team of 7 people with different specialisms. So we had book and paper conservators, textile conservators, an object conservator as well. And this is some photos of the project in action. Now I have to come clean here and tell you that these are professional photos, and they are somewhat staged. These are photos taken by our photography colleagues, and it was a deliberate attempt to capture the work that we were doing back when we were in the weeds of cataloguing. So on the left there you can see 2 of my colleagues. That's actually the archive assistant that I manage and also my manager. They're looking at some sketches by David Bowie for an unfinished musical that he was working on in the mid-1970s. He was working on several musicals in the mid-1970s. I think this one is the post-apocalyptic musical on roller skates, which is quite nice. In the middle here, we've got my colleagues in object cataloguing, and they're cataloguing this suit that Bowie wore for the Life on Mars music video. If any of you are Bowie fans, which I presume some of you are, you'll recognise this pretty much instantly. And then on the right is one of my colleagues in paper conservation, diligently repackaging some charcoal drawings, again by Bowie. So it's quite sketch heavy, but just by happenstance, there is also the written word and quite a lot of it in the archive, some of which you'll see later. So the project had 2 phases. The first phase, which was meant to be a year, but it got a bit longer for various reasons, was basically involved all of the Bowie archive being shipped from the US to the UK. And we were tasked with cataloguing it to what the V&A calls accessibility standard in an off-site warehouse. So we weren't actually in the main V&A building. And that's because the David Bowie Centre, which is where the stuff now lives, was purpose-built and it hadn't actually been completed when we started work. Accessibility standard in this context just means the minimum you can get away with. So we were making sure that we were just cataloguing it to the level that we could move it safely while knowing where everything was. Essentially, that was the goal for the first year. In actual fact, we ended up going above that, but that was our baseline. It was also assessed by conservators at this time, and any significant conservation work that had to be done involved shipping particular things away from the off-site warehouse into the main V&A museum building. So after about a year, the David Bowie Centre was ready and the material was moved. And I should mention as well that the shipping took about 8 months in total, and 8 shipments. And that photograph there on the right is but a few of the many crates of material that we unpacked. So the cataloguing team was basically responsible for this stuff from the moment it arrived in the warehouse. So we were the people crowbarring open the crates and figuring out what was inside. I think there were 149 crates in total. At the end of phase one, about 200 items from the Bowie archive were installed in an exhibition space in the David Bowie Centre. I wasn't responsible for curating this. That was the V&A's curatorial team, but we were responsible for cataloguing all of the stuff to item level for display. And you can see some of my colleagues in technical services installing the exhibition here. What I think is really nice about this exhibition, it's quite unusual, I think, for the V&A, the Victorian Albert Museum, in that there's quite a lot of archival material, probably more archival material, book and paper material, than three-dimensional stuff, for which I'm very grateful. It's really nice to see the stuff out there and being viewed by people on a daily basis. Got another photo here of the install. If you are a Bowie fan, particularly an 80s Bowie fan, you might recognise these wings. They're costume wings that Bowie wore on a 1980s tour called the Glass Spider Tour. And this is a nice example again of 3D objects being mixed to quite good effect with paper archival objects. So you see the wings themselves there, and I can tell you that they took a lot of curatorial work, conservation work, to get them ready for safe display. And then behind them, you've got these photos of Bowie wearing the wings, either archival reproduction at the top there or original archival material there at the bottom. So we're now in phase 2 of the project. So the David Bowie Centre opened at the beginning of September this year, which feels to me like a very long time ago, but actually wasn't that long ago, really. All of our catalogues were published. So the book and paper catalogue, the archive catalogue, is available to browse, and likewise there's a catalogue of all of the 3D objects. It's also available to browse, and members of the public can book appointments to view anything at all, whether it be from the paper collection or an object, unless there's like conservation or data protection reasons why they can't. Those are the only reasons why we deny access. So at the moment we're just working on catalogue improvements, so getting the catalogues as detailed as we can. There's a little bit more cataloguing to do on the object side, because a lot of the objects had like multiple parts and so on. And then the entire project team finishes in May 2026. The David Bowie Centre will remain open, of course. Appointments will continue, but there won't functionally be any cataloguing left to do by that point. So these are some pictures of the centre. I'm actually going to show you this one first. This is the display space. So I don't know if any of you would have seen the David Bowie's exhibition when it happened in 2013. I know it toured North America around that time, but that was a lot larger. This is a much more small, like intimate exhibition space, and what you see here is almost all of it. So there's a couple more bays in the next door room, but this is pretty much it. And it's quite densely packed. There are about, as I mentioned, about 200 items here in 12 cases. And then in the centre here, you can see this very large screen. This plays clips of Bowie performing throughout his career. So it starts in 1969 and goes all the way up to Black Star. And then This photo here will show you that on the right-hand side of this quite large room, it's just exclusively archival storage. So if I go back to this, you can see like the depth of the room. So it's that depth again, but just all boxes. So there's about 1,000 boxes in total, just over 1,000 archival containers. And I don't know about you guys, but it's the first place I've worked where the archival storage is on display and is kind of part of the exhibition. Um, it's a blessing and a curse. The Bowie exhibition is open every day. It's open 7 days a week. Um, so it kind of impedes access to an extent to the boxes. You have to get in early, grab the boxes, and then move them elsewhere if you want to work on them. But it's very gratifying to have the archive be so visible, to have it be such a visible part of the Bowie experience, and I think it really helps to make people understand the sheer scale of the stuff that we have. So they can see the stuff that's on display, but they can also see that there's like loads more that they can order and view if they want to. Side note, I've got a lot of compliments on the neatness of the labels, which is also a first because people don't really get to see those boxes. So the rest of this talk is going to focus on what I think happened when the archive was made. And as I say, this is the stuff that I only know this stuff really through the records themselves, the clues that have been left behind. So firstly, how was the archive collected? So as I mentioned, it was all collected by or sometimes on behalf of David Bowie. And then within that, we've got like roughly three categories. So we've got things that came directly from Bowie to the archive with apparently no intermediary. Then we've got things that, for whatever reason, leave Bowie's custody and then come back. And then we've got a very small subcategory of things that are added after Bowie dies, and presumably then the decision is taken by somebody else. So if we look firstly at things that come from Bowie to the archive, this is one of my favourite things to show, even though it's not very jazzy, and that's this. This is a binder from this gig that Bowie put on in 1997 for his 50th birthday. It was officially called David Bowie and Friends, a very special concert, but evidently behind the scenes it always seems to be referred to as the 50th birthday show, and that's what all the labels say. So the binder contains lyrics, notes, photos. It appears to be the kind of binder that a performer would need while preparing for a show. What's really cool about it, though, is that the stuff that's written on the front. So this is David Bowie's handwriting, and you'll get used to this as we go through the rest of this presentation. I think you'll come away having an eye for what Bowie's handwriting looks like, which I don't know if that would ever serve you well in a pub quiz, but there you go. So he's given it a title, 50th birthday show. He's given it a date, and it's actually quite a precise date because we know that the rehearsals were in December 1996, and we know that the show itself was in January 1997, which is why we have 2 years. And of course, he's written archive in really big letters on the front. This is one of the few times that he writes archive. It's more common for him to write something like this. So forgive me for the photo quality. You'll see this one is taken by my photography colleagues. This one's unfortunately taken by me. So this one is an envelope and it says Zoolander on it. Bowie had a cameo in the movie Zoolander, and then he's written "file, please." And it's more likely for us to see words like "file" or "keep." And we see that really throughout the archive. It's slightly more rare to see the word archive essentially used here as a verb. So it shows to me that at least some of the time, at least from like the late 90s, Bowie is thinking of a collection of his own documents as an archive. And to me, that's really, really interesting. I've not really worked with collections before where I know for sure that the person thought of this stuff as an archive before it became one. And so it's really clear to me that he's thinking of legacy here and perhaps of access. He's perhaps thinking about who or what is going to end up seeing this seeing this stuff and what it will say about him in the future. So I've shown you a couple of instances of things that have come straight from Bowie to a filing system or to an archive. There's also this lovely category of things that have been sent to Bowie, including some fan mail. So we have 117 fan letters in the archive, and I find that very interesting because surely more than 117 people wrote to Bowie, surely. And we've only got 117, and we don't know why. We don't know what the selection criteria were, but we do know that Bowie was actively involved in deciding what to keep. This, you might recognise, is Bowie's handwriting, written on the front of this envelope. I'm going to attempt to zoom it. Oh dear, I don't think I can, alas. The letter's really lovely. It's from a fan who's writing to him in 1990. The fan is only 65 years old, but he clearly thinks of himself as very old indeed. And he calls himself an old age pensioner and says, "Don't write me off, listen to what I've got to say." And then he gives Bowie like life advice, saying basically live a good life because you'll be a long time dead. Bowie's clearly charmed by this and has decided to keep it. And just to say about the fan material, we have about 30 boxes worth of fan material. So in addition to fan letters, we have lots of art that people posted to Bowie, tapes that they posted to him. We even have a novel someone wrote and sent to Bowie, and we have a complete run of fanzines as well. And this, I think, is also really interesting, that if Bowie's having a hand in his own archive collection, and he's actively himself deciding to put fan material in there, I think it really says something about his relationship to his fans, or perhaps his relationship to his legacy, that he wants to include fans in there. The final quite funny thing I wanted to say about fans is that Barack Obama and Bill Clinton wrote to Bowie, and both of the letters are categorised in the archive, or were categorised when it came to us, as fan letters, which I think is quite humbling. And they still are in the fan section of the archive. So then there's also this category of material that leaves Bowie's custody and then is brought back. We've only got a few examples of this, and this one's my favourite. This is an auction catalogue. So Christie's is an auction house here in London, and at the bottom you can see that it's an auction of pop and collectible guitars that happens in 2000. And you'll hopefully recognise Bowie's handwriting by now. He's written file, I bought item number 8. So if we skip ahead to item number 8, you can see Bowie's written "got it!" ! And then he's got this post-it note he's stuck on it. So what he got was a reel-to-reel tape recording of the song Star, which appears on the Ziggy Stardust album that comes out in 1972. This one was produced in 1971 and made its way into the hands of a band called Chameleon, and then for the next nearly 30 years is not within Bowie's control. And then when it's put on sale as like genuine Bowie material, he goes out there and buys it back. I think this is a lovely illustration of the process of buying back your own stuff, not least because Bowie appears to have gone probably to the auction himself. I mean, he is the person who's written on this catalogue. I think it's also interesting that he's decided to file the catalogue itself. He's decided to file the evidence of this deed. And again, we can see this word file here, this active deciding of what goes into his filing system. Just briefly, we've got another example of something that's brought back. So this is a self-portrait of Bowie in The Man Who Fell to Earth. We were given this information by the Bowie estate. He gave this self-portrait to Nick Rogue, who was the director of The Man Who Fell to Earth. The director then gifted it to Bowie's co-star, Candy Clark, and then Candy Clark sold it at auction in 2015. Now, crucially, 2015 is the year that Bowie is dying. And the auction happened in October 2015, so quite late on in the year. He died the following January. We don't know if he bought it back at auction or if somebody else was sent out to buy it back, but we do know that it's another example of something that is generated in the 70s, has a long life away from Bowie, and then right at the very end is brought back into his control, and that this is the information that we were given by the estate about this item. So the final category of things that have come into Bowie's custody, come into the archives custody, is things that came in posthumously. And this is a really, really small category. It's small enough to be kind of statistically insignificant, but I wanted to show you this. And I'm sorry that I can't zoom in, but there is actually a photo of this online that's quite high quality, which perhaps I can figure out how to link to you all by email. So these are post-it notes that were found in Bowie's office when he died. They came in an envelope that says 18th century musical on it, and that is in Bowie's handwriting, and all of the post-it notes are in Bowie's handwriting. And the post-it notes contain mostly notes about real historical things that happened, mostly in London in the 1700s. So there's a note about like the Gordon riots. There's a note about prison around here being burnt to the ground. It looks kind of like it just got to the research stage, and not really any further. We also have a notebook that has Spectator written on the front in Bowie's handwriting, and then a few notes, but really it's not many pages. And again, it's these sort of exploratory ideas rather than a script. And we have a few index cards in the same category. This came to us within a 6-box collection of material marked unrealised projects, and this spans the early 1970s up until 2015, 2016, and they're all things that Bowie was working on that for whatever reason didn't come to fruition. And this particular material, the Spectator material, also came to us with a note from someone who was working for Bowie when he died. And the note says that they went into his office and found this stuff, and then decided to put it into the archive. So what's interesting there is that it's at least one example of material that somebody else has decided, okay, this is worth preserving. Bowie may have laid the groundwork for the archival collection, but at this point somebody else has taken over. So how much input did Bowie have in the amassing of the archive? Well, I've talked a bit about his writing, things like archive, file, keep on various things. We've got an idea that he's probably having an active hand to a greater or lesser degree in selecting exactly what goes into the archive. He's going out into the world and repurchasing things, at least 2 things. There's rumours of a lot more, but at least 2 things he's going out and buying back. What else? There's a lot of stuff about post-it notes in this talk, but we found loads and loads of post-it notes throughout the paper archive in David Bowie's handwriting, just stuck on bits of paper. And each one of them is explaining the provenance or significance of an item. And it's quite funny to see them because sometimes they're literally stuck on like very, very valuable handwritten lyrics for really, really famous Bowie songs, and then it's just got this incongruous, like more modern post-it note stuck to it. And when we first started encountering them, we didn't really know the significance of the post-it notes. It took us all a while, I think, to get our eye in, but it's clear that they're all Bowie's. So here is an example. This is a makeup chart. And this post-it note was just stuck on the front here in the top right corner. It says mem, which is probably short for memorabilia, which is what Bowie's writing on a lot of things. It seems like a category that he has for most of his papers. And then he said it's a tour. He's given us a date, 1976. He's explained what it is. It's a makeup chart for touring, and he's given us a creator. It was devised by Mike Westmore. So we know from this that it's a makeup chart from the Station to Station tour. This again, I'm afraid, is a photograph taken by me, but hopefully it's clear enough that you can see what he's written here. So this is a really interesting one. It's the only post-it note I've found that has two handwritings on it, two different people's handwriting. And let's see how well you can recognise Bowie's handwriting now we're near the end of the talk. So the top here, we've got memorabilia, and that's not in Bowie's hand. And then we've got my set list for Iggy Tour, which is written by Bowie. And then more info, please, smiley face, kiss, C. And then Bowie coming back and saying me on piano, 1977. We know from this that this is a set list for the Idiot Tour that he did play piano on for Iggy Pop in 1977. So this gives an answer to the question of like who are these post-its for? In the short term, they're probably for C or a group of people, including C. We don't really know. Giving more information about what exactly this stuff is. While cataloguing, we've kept all of the post-it notes with their original items because we now consider them really intrinsically part of the item. That Bowie added this to them, and therefore it should remain with the item that he added it to. And these are the only two ones that I selected, but I could have shown you more because they're really all the way through. You see them, and all they're doing is pointing out, okay, this is exactly what this is, and there's normally a date and a purpose for why the record was created. It's nice to imagine that this was done for the cataloguer, for me, or for the researcher, for the end user. But it's probably more likely that it was done for the people looking after David Bowie's records to explain what they are. Some final thoughts then about the input Bowie had in the archive. So I just want to briefly reflect on what isn't included in the archive that you might expect to find. Basically, there isn't any boring stuff in there. And I don't necessarily mean that as a compliment. You don't really have like run-of-the-mill admin papers. And often these are the most fascinating things in an archive because they kind of accidentally tell you things, bits of gossip or, interesting happenings that you wouldn't find out another way. We don't have any of those really. We don't have any financial documents, so I don't know how much Bowie was paid for things. That information is simply not included. On the other end of the scale, we don't have like super personal stuff. And we get this all the time. Now that we're open, people come up to us and say, can I see David Bowie's diaries? And we can't show them to them because we don't have them. I think it's really interesting that people really want to see them. There's something about Bowie. There's something about pop stars in general, but particularly maybe about Bowie, that there's this feeling of access to him or kind of ownership over him or something. People really want to see the private stuff. But by and large, it just isn't there. There's quite a lot of correspondence, but none of it is terribly personal. All of the correspondence is with business, for want of a better word, business associates of people in the music industry or in the famous people in the entertainment industry. And most of the letters are about work. There's also so many photographs, really tens of thousands of photos, but very, very, very few personal ones. Almost every photo is taken by a professional photographer engaged for the purposes of taking publicity photos, essentially, of David Bowie. So there's lots of photos of like the famous ones that you know, like Mick Rock, photos of Bowie on stage performing in various personas. We've got staged photographs by people like Sakita, photographs for album covers by people like Brian Duffy. But we don't really have like the behind the scenes snap. So we have a few, but really the majority are professional ones. In fact, I even got quite excited because I found a folder of photos taken by David Bowie, and I thought finally the personal stuff is here, this treasure trove. And I looked in it, and it's actually Bowie was asked to work at the first Biennale festival in Johannesburg because he was an art critic in the 90s, so he was asked to go over there as an art critic. And actually, every single photo in this album is just a photo of the art that he was critiquing. So every time you think there's going to be something super personal, you're hit with this. No, this is a professional archive. To conclude, then, Bowie clearly had a large impact on what went into the archive, and it is unlikely that material was added by accident. This is an archive that there's a certain amount of control and a certain amount of thought as to what goes into the archive. And ultimately, really, that means that it's an archive of Bowie, the pop star, not an archive of Bowie, the person. So he's still maintaining that, I think, distance between him, the real person, and the star, even posthumously. And that's the end. So I'm just going to unshare my screen. And I'm back in the room.
Thank you so much, Abigail. We do have a number of questions that have been coming in, so I'm just going to launch right in to those. And let me scroll back up to the top. We got some in as the presentation was happening. So one of the first questions was, how will the center be staffed after this project ends for collection maintenance?
Yes, that's a great question. So there is an existing team for the V&A's archives. So we have a theatre and performance archivist who's my manager. She's really responsible for the Bowie archive in the long term. By design, all of the Bowie archive appointments are facilitated by that team and not by the Bowie project team, although I've been stepping in occasionally just because I find it fun. It's not really a core part of my job. So that will continue. There's a core conservation team that is always at the V&A, including book and paper team of conservators, and so they will continue to be able to do any work on items that needs to be done. But any kind of additional work in the cataloguing department won't be done, and hopefully it won't need to be done if I've done my job right.
Thank you, Abigail. So next question in the chat. When a person makes an appointment to view an item, is there a reading room for viewing?
Yes, I probably should have said that. There's quite a lot of information to get in about the Bowie Centre. So as you come into the Bowie Centre, there's a room on the right the walls are completely glass, and so visitors can see in, and that's where people will come. That's the reading room essentially for the Bowie collection, so that's where people will come for their archive appointments. There's a larger room to the left where all of the objects are seen, and it's in that larger room because the objects are really big and they tend to need different stuff in that room for people to see them.
Thank you. The next question is, are there any rotating exhibits in addition to the permanent items on display?
Yeah, so I said permanent because it's permanently going to be a display, but actually everything in V&A East Storehouse is going to be rotated out after 2 years, and that includes Bowie. So there will always be Bowie stuff, but in just under 2 years, there'll be a brand new exhibition. One of the bays is a guest curated bay, and that will rotate out slightly more frequently. At the moment, that bay is curated by Nile Rodgers, who you've probably all heard of, and a British band called The Last Dinner Party, who I don't think are famous in the US yet. But yeah, they'll be, I think the next group that are going to curate that are probably going to be the V&A East Youth Collective. So that's young people from the local area will be asked to curate a bay of the exhibition.
Very cool. Thank you. So our next question, I think is related to some of those notes that Bowie wrote on materials. Did David Bowie employ an archivist or someone to help him kind of organize his stuff?
Yeah, at least one. Um, he had at least one person whose job title was archivist, but she was responsible for everything, including the the three-dimensional objects as well as the paper material. And so the archives came to us in very, very good condition, very well arranged. There was only about 30 boxes of material that wasn't arranged that we needed to sort of discover an original order for them, so to speak. Everything else we've kept in the exact order that it was in when it came to us, and it's a very logical order. It made my life a lot easier. So she's the only named archivist that I know of, but I know of other people who were kind of essentially maybe admin staff at some point, but then became really responsible for the records.
Great. So I think there's a lot of interest in this facility. And the next question is, does the open archive storage having being open every day, does this cause any conservation concerns? And then what extra steps are taken to maintain the climate control?
That's a good question. It's the relative humidity and the temperature are monitored, and they're within the windows that they should be for archival storage anyway. They are within archival grade storage boxes and then behind locked cabinets. So in a way, it's kind of not that different, I suppose, to climate controlled archival storage anyway, just because of the temp and our age. Although there's probably more work goes into maintaining that temperature and relative humidity because there's so many people coming in and out. So there's probably a lot of pumps going on, making sure that it's all safe. I think a greater concern was security, and that's why all of the shelves are behind like locked doors, or the material's too high to reach, to make sure that nobody can half inch anything.
Um, Thank you. We have the next question. Sorry, I was trying to make sure I didn't lose my spot in the chat. The question is, where was Bowie's archive located before it was shipped over to London?
I can't tell you exactly where it was located, probably. I can tell you that it was near where I can tell you that it was near New York. Yeah, and also additionally, yeah, it was in a archival grade storage facility, as I understand it. There's a small amount of stuff that came to us direct from his various houses or offices, but most of it was in this storage facility outside of where he lived.
Great. Thank you. The next one was, could the XC or the signed, of C, could that be Coco Schwab?
Yeah, I actually had that in my presentation attributed to her, but then I didn't want to speculate too much because I don't know. I think it's quite likely that it is her, but couldn't tell you for sure.
Um, these two questions are kind of similarly related. So the first part is, do you know whether a personal archive exists somewhere and might land elsewhere? And the kind of related question is, did the V&A know that this was not a personal archive before and when they acquired it? And were you allowed to kind of assess that if it wasn't something you were aware of?
Yes, these are great questions. Um, um, I know that there are some there are some things that the Bowie estate chose not to transfer to the V&A, and I know that there's a desire to have to revisit that at some point, but also a respect that these are like Bowie's surviving family members, and that it might not ever be transferred because that might be something that they just want to keep for themselves, or it might be that Bowie never intended that stuff to come to it, be made accessible to the public. We did know it was not a personal archive. It I mean, I say we, I wasn't on the project at that time, but my manager, who's really ultimately responsible for Bowie, surveyed the archive in situ before it came to the V&A. I'm stumbling over my words slightly because it was part purchase and part gifted, and I don't remember how to say that, but before it was acquired. Yeah.
Great. The next question is, have you been getting a lot of research requests or requests to come visit the items, and is there a reference archivist on staff?
Yeah. I don't know how many of you work for like archives versus how many of you work for archival facilities in museums. But I've kind of noticed at the V&A that there's more. It's easier to promote museum-based services than it is to promote archives-based services, and so there's been a much bigger uptake of appointments to see three-dimensional items than appointments to see the paper archive. The staffing of the team is such that the paper archive can only be viewed 2 days a week. The three-dimensional objects can be seen 7 days a week, just kind of the way things have been set up at the moment. So there have been a lot of research requests, but more so on the object side. I don't know what a reference archivist is because I don't think we have those over here.
For reference, usually somebody who is kind of the person who deals with like the patrons specifically and organizing everything. So I think the question is more, is there somebody dedicated just for the Bowie archive to do this for patrons, or is it just the regular staff?
It will be the theatre and performance archivist who's responsible for the whole theatre and performance archive collection, which includes well over 600 individual archival fonds. So yeah, when my team leaves, she'll be extremely busy. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next question is, are there any digital files in the archive, sound or moving image recordings?
Not really. There are no original sound recordings, and I believe they would all be held by whichever record companies owned the rights to them at the time that they were made. We certainly don't have any. We do have a very small number of photographs that are born digital, but the vast majority of the photographic collection is either photographic prints or it's slides. We have some digital surrogates of paper items as well, but we always default to providing access to the paper items. And V&A doesn't currently have facility to provide like access at scale to digital material. It will eventually, but doesn't currently.
Great. So there was a question that says, did money come with this collection? Redding, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, if there was physical money in the collection or if that meant that it was purchased.
I will answer both,
okay.
because it's fun to answer both. Yes, there was physical money in the collection. There is this is like really deep cut information, but there's a borough in London called Lambeth, and there's an area of Lambeth called Brixton, and Bowie lived part of his life there. And they have this thing called the Brixton pound, which is a pound that you can only spend, it's currency you can only spend in Brixton. And there's a special version of the Brixton pound that's got a picture of David Bowie's face on, and there is a Brixton pound in the archive. Beyond that, I don't think there's any cash. The entire project team's salaries was paid for by a donor called Len Blavatnik, who gives a lot of money to museums in the States and also in the UK. And he basically paid for the V&A to buy the parts of the collection that they bought, paid for our salaries, and also paid for all of the conservation material, including the boxes that we repackaged everything into. I believe that some of the funding was also provided by Warner, and some of the material in the Bowie archive was donated by Bowie's estate. So kind of three-way donations.
So our next question is, assuming there's a donor agreement, are there any interesting requirements, use, storage, access, etc., that you can share?
Um, they didn't really have any unusual requirements about storage and access. I think, like any donor, they had some concerns over public access, and that was a hurdle really for everyone to get over in terms of like explaining what that was going to be. I think they had some concerns about like privacy for people who weren't Bowie, and so we had to do a lot of work to reassure them that under data protection legislation we would keep certain things closed, in some cases for an extremely long time, to protect the privacy of people. But other than that, nothing outlandish.
Great. So the next question is that you mentioned in the 50th birthday show binder that the term archive used in context was meant as a verb. Can you go more into that? I usually encounter the term being used as a noun and not much attention to the verbing or active care of archive.
Yeah, I guess that was just kind of a throwaway comment, but like he's written like keep or file, and in that context, I'm choosing to read archive as a verb, as in can you archive this? I don't know if that's used like over there really as much as it's used over here, but I guess I would read it as like, can you put this in the archive? But I mean, it might not have meant that. It might meant archive, as in this is the place to which it should go. I guess we'll never know, really.
Um, Next question was Bowie specific at all about his legacy or how he wanted to be remembered beyond the general point that he wanted to be remembered for his professional work? So this might be more kind of an inference question, unless there was something like very specific in the donation.
There was nothing specific in the donation about how he wanted to be represented or remembered. So you're right. I mean, it is all inference. There might have been conversations because Bowie did work with V&A for the major exhibition that they did, David Bowie Is, while he was alive, and those conversations may have happened at a level like quite high above me, but it's not something that I'm privy to. So this is all stuff that I've just guessed essentially from the archive.
Are there any original paintings included in the archive?
Yes. So for those of you who don't know, Bowie was an avid art collector and was also a maker of art. We don't really have most of his art collection. I presume that either remained with his family or there was a large sale when he died here in London of a lot of his art. We have a few sketches. We do have a small number of pieces of. We have a small number of paintings, computer art that he made. We have printed copies of, and then we have some three-dimensional art that was exhibited in various locations, some of it very large. We have a guest book from one of his exhibitions, in art exhibitions, in which someone has written, "Don't give up the day job." I think it's a little bit harsh. Yeah, so it's not the majority of the collection, but it is very much there. We also have a lot of writing by Bowie about art, including a full run of the journal Modern Painter, I think it's called, which he wrote in routinely.
Awesome. And then the last question I'm seeing in the chat is, what collection management system are you using to track the 90,000 items? Are there different systems for the books, archives, and objects, or is it all one system?
Yeah, it's the short answer is it's all one system. We have a content management system that's called variously Collections Index Plus or Museum Index Plus, depending on what the branding is, but it's the same thing, and it contains both archival descriptive records and object descriptive records. So that's what we're using. I don't know about you guys, but ours is really janky, and I'm unsurprised by that because that is my experience universally of archival content management systems. The V&A does have a library, which, in addition, which has its own content management system that's yet to be integrated with the rest of them. But while there are some books in the archive, they're all described in the archives CMS bit rather than in the library bit.
And one more question.
And just to say, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There aren't 90,000 catalogue records. Because of their small team and the tight turnaround, and just because it's an archive, like a lot of that is like many documents within a single file, and that's how they've been described. So you won't find 90,000 catalogue entries, fortunately for my sanity.
And we'll end on this one, but the last question was, how much did you nerd out about this job?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, everyone on the team comes to Bowie really from like a different perspective. There's a lot of like Gen Z people on the team who I think have like a different entry points for Bowie to me. But yeah, I think the first month or two was really a lot of just people going, oh my God, look at what I found. And then everyone kind of crowding around and like having a look. And that was a really fun and necessary, I think, part of the archive to be like starstruck by it. Now I think we've lost that starstruck nature a bit. It's just kind of the nature of archiving, really, and we've gone kind of more to the business side of things. But every so often, we still find something cool and get excited about it.
Thank you, everyone, so much for coming. We will let Abigail go to sleep. It's still a work night, or whatever it is that you do with your evenings. But I really appreciate Abigail coming and doing this. This is a very exciting one for us, especially those of us that are in the US. And so I want to thank everybody again. I hope that you'll join our future meet and greets. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much for organising this. Thanks, everyone.